Hey, welcome to the Hell Has an Exit podcast. I'm your host, Bryan Alzate. This show is not affiliated with any specific 12-step program. If you or a loved one is struggling with an addiction, please find a local 12-step meeting. If you believe you may need detox or drug treatment of any kind, please call 888-699-9395 to speak to a specialist. The show is sponsored by United Recovery Project, a state-of-the-art drug and alcohol rehab facility. You can visit our website at unitedrecoveryproject.com. Welcome to Hell Has an Exit podcast. I'm your host, Bryan Alzate. Today I have my good friend, Jacob Bradshaw. He's got an amazing story. I actually don't know most of it, so it'd be interesting to hear it. So I guess let's start from the beginning, man.
Thanks for having me on, Bryan. Really big fan of the podcast. I'm going to talk about my kind of early childhood for a little bit. And the reason I want to talk about it is I had, and I didn't learn this until I got into recovery, but I have these traits of alcoholism, right? That they exhibited themselves way before I took a drink or got high. So I was born in Huntington, West Virginia, which is in the middle of nowhere. My mom was an undergrad. She had me young. I think she was 20, 21 when she had me. Junior, senior in college, and my dad wasn't around, right? It was like a young college kind of relationship that resulted in me. So my mom has me, and I've got no father around, and my mom was, surrounded by like really strong, funny, cool women, and that's who I was raised by, for like the first 3-4 years of my life. So Huntington, West Virginia now, because of Purdue Pharma and the opioid epidemic, it's ground zero, right? It's very sad to even drive through Huntington, but at this time, it was a really cool, artsy, a lot of Grateful Dead heads, a lot of, it was a cool place to be a kid. And some of my earliest memories were, my mom and my aunt and her friends, taking me to see Rocky Horror Picture Show when I'm 3-4 years old, right? So it was a cool childhood.
Love Rocky Horror.
Love it to this day. So then my mom finishes her undergrad. She ended up getting her master's when it was all said and done, but she finishes her undergrad and she moves back to where I'm originally from and my family's from, which is Southern Ohio, right? Maybe we'll get into it a little bit later. I'm from Portsmouth, Ohio, is where I was, raised from 4 years old on. That's the legitimate ground zero of the opioid epidemic. It was where the first doctors were ever federally prosecuted for opening pill mills. I've done some stories with the New York Times pretty recently where they've focused in on that area as where it all started. So I moved back there when I'm 4 or 5 years old, and my mom gets married, right? Great guy. We get a house, and then we build a house, and I've got, he was, like I said, really good guy, hardworking guy, did everything he could to show me, how to be responsible, how to be a man, taught me how to, fight and play ball and, all the stuff that little boys do. But I immediately recognized, like, this is an authority figure in my life. And I rebelled against that instantly.
You think because he wasn't your real dad?
I think that probably had subliminally a little to do with it, probably a lot to do with it. And then I think a lot of it is I just have this deep-seated hatred for authority. And my mom and her friends, it was like, really, like, do whatever you want to do. You know what I mean? You want to paint on the walls, paint on the walls. And then, he's coming in trying to teach me a little bit of responsibility, and I didn't like it immediately. And more importantly, I knew from a very young age, we're talking 5, 6, that my mom had guilt for my real dad not being around, and I knew I could play that against him, and I knew I could use it to get what I want. At the time, it was DuckTales for Nintendo or, whatever the new thing that I wanted, I could kind of pin them against each other. And that manipulation, it's always been with me, right? And what I've learned now is like, that's alcoholism. That's drug addiction. Those abandonment issues that I had from Jump Street, those are the root causations of like why I ended up really self-destructing later in life. So I get into school. I do really well in school. I always did. I had the same group of friends for a long time, got into baseball when I was 5 years old, and just kind of had like a very normal suburban life, right? from the outside looking in, looked like, I clearly had everything I needed, had pretty much everything I wanted, and things were good. Other than maybe those abandonment issues, no trauma, no parents arguing, nothing. So I go through elementary school, I get into junior high school, and I took an IQ test and I took another test that got me into a program called Talented and Gifted, which some of you may have heard of or have had in your schools. And so I went to like a special part of the school with other kids that were in Talented and Gifted, and Talented and Gifted programs, 6th grade, 7th grade. Going into 8th grade, I realized it wasn't cool. I was also not a genius by any stretch of the imagination, but I've always been, relatively perceptive and smart. And I knew that this program was like, if I stay in this, it's going to help me get into a great college, which is going to help me get a great job and have a great life. Like, I was cognizant of all these things, but I very clearly remember saying, I'd rather be cool, man. I'd much rather be cool. And like reading, Thoreau in 8th grade, it's not cool. And I quit and I dropped out. And this is like another alcoholic, drug addict theme of my life, of quitting, I have a fear of failure. I have a fear of success. And without a program, these are the kind of things that I do. So I quit, go into high school, and then the whole, a lot of you are probably familiar with it, the whole friend circle starts to change. I'm still playing, I played varsity sports pretty early in high school, but I start experimenting with alcohol and experimenting with weed. And in this is right before OxyContin and Purdue Pharma targeted my area. That looked like, getting a bottle of Mad Dog 2020 and me and a couple of my 14, 15-year-old buddies camping out and drinking so much we get sick, right? And you hear a lot of old timers, and this is cool, it's their story, but you hear a lot of people talk about like the first time I took that drink, like it was it, like I knew. That wasn't my experience with it. I did it because I liked doing something I knew was going against the grain, going against the authority, and it made me cool and it made me fit in. And that's really what I loved about it. I didn't really like the effects at first produced by alcohol. I didn't.
I was the same way.
And I think, dude, and I really think like that's like, and I'm not saying anyone, it's not me to judge who's the real deal and who's not, but it's like in retrospect, these underlying like emptiness, voids that I had inside of me, like, this is alcoholism for me, right? And I can very clearly remember getting a little older, 16, and going to the keg parties. And I would go to the keg back and forth 30 times. But I'm only 4 beers in, because when you're not looking, I'm going behind a tree and I'm dumping the beer out, right? Because I just wanted you all to see I'm drinking 30 beers. I'm the fucking man. That desire to fit in, bro, that is like, luckily early in life, like alcohol, even though I am an alcoholic, it didn't really set in on me like that. But all of those behaviors, like they really set the course for years of chaos and misery. And then, and maybe we can link an article, because I've written some articles with some cool folks about like this time frame, but this is when Purdue Pharma targeted Southern Ohio, Eastern Kentucky with OxyContin. And, I had friends whose dads were doctors, and like, a lot of people put a lot of blame on the doctors, and a lot of times there's reason to do so. But really what was happening was Purdue Pharma sent these drug reps, these marketing experts into these areas because they had done research. They knew there was a lot of blue collar workers, a lot of back injuries, a lot of pain. They knew this was the area to target for this new long acting, quote, I'm doing air quotes with my fingers, pain medication.
Not addictive.
So that not very non-addictive,
Not
according
addictive,
to these.
not habit-forming.
Not habit-forming, life-saving medication. And so these reps,
with the time release,
these reps would come in and they would sit down with these doctors, and like a lot of these doctors, some excluded, they really fell for it. They were family doctors, and they really, people from the Midwest, man, they care about their community. They care about each other. And they bought into this hook, line, and sinker. Like, we've got a medicine that is going to help your patients, right? And they bought into it. And I'm telling you, this is like the late 90s, 99, it exploded. I'm graduating high school almost. I think 99, I was a junior. And we would now go to parties, which previously people would be drinking. You'd see some weed being passed around. But in my town, like, hard drugs weren't a thing. Unless I was watching Train Spotting,
Mm-hmm.
I never heard anybody talk about heroin, never knew anyone who had done heroin, never heard about cocaine. I think my dad, maybe talked about some bikers back in the day making crank or something, but it was not around. It just didn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, within 6 months, you go to a party, you see the jocks and the cool kids and the cheerleaders and the stoners, and they're smoking weed and they're drinking out of the keg, and there's also a plate being passed around the room with an Oxycontin or 10 with lines chopped up.
Mm-hmm.
And every social circle was just snorting a line of Oxycontin. We didn't know. We didn't know we were doing heroin,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, well, I was already addicted to crack when I did Oxy, but I had no idea that I was doing an even harder drug or something similar to crack when I did Oxys.
Yeah.
It was kind of like something to, if anything, like a lesser, not as addictive drug that was pretty social. Because it doesn't put you in a crazy nod when you first start doing it. It makes you real, you start talking, you have a lot of energy. What I'd always tell people on opiates is that someone could be like, hey, you got to go paint the fence for 12 hours. And if you're on opiates, if you do an Oxy 80, you do it with a smile on your face for those 8 hours.
Yeah.
It makes anything enjoyable.
Yeah, absolutely. And we didn't have any, there was no, we have a lot of advocacy out there now, right? In schools, there's people, they're coming in, they're telling their story, the word is out now, fortunately, and clearly we still have a horrible opioid epidemic and problem. But for the most part, people know, like if I do heroin, it's probably a bad idea. We had a cop that maybe came into school once every 3 years with a big suitcase full of drugs, told us what they were. And we were all like, wow, that's cool. I want to try LSD or whatever the case may be. But no one told us anything about prescription pills, right? So I can very clearly remember doing Oxycontin every day and being able to say, like, at least I'm not a drug addict. At least I'm not a junkie. At least I'm not doing crack or coke or heroin, because we were able to make that separation because it was a prescription. The doctor wrote it, right?
And you're not buying it in the hood.
No,
and whatever.
No, and that was another byproduct, man, of this Purdue Pharma thing, right? So you had a lot of people who were older and they're on SSRI. They hadn't seen $10,000 cash probably ever. And now all of a sudden they're on this medication for their stomach or for their knee or for their back, and like whispers, and they're hearing from their sons or daughters' friends that, hey, this prescription's worth, $60 a pill. I've got 120, 180 of these. That's $10,000, right? So a lot of good people started selling drugs, and they were able to justify to themselves the same way that I was able to justify taking it. It's not a drug. I'm not selling heroin. It's prescriptions from the doctor. It's not going to hurt anybody. And so they were everywhere immediately. And then very, very quickly, my friends started to die. And like I had one traumatic death before this. It was a car wreck. A lot of us have that, unfortunately, in school, where we have that one friend who passed away. My buddy, Tommy Barber, wrecked his Mustang. And, it was a tough thing to go through at 14, 15. But that was the only death I had dealt with. And now all of a sudden, my friend Anthony Perkins, whose dad was a dentist or doctor, whatever, dies. And then my friend Eric Ruby dies. Then my friend Aaron Metzler dies. And then Stevie Knoll dies. Death after death after death. At 19, 20, 21, all my friends are dying. And there was no infrastructure. There was no treatment. We had like court-ordered treatment centers around, but there was no one was helping my entire generation deal with the trauma of losing 30, 40, 50% of their friends at that age, right? And so I went to what I knew like my solution was, and it was my solution for a long time. I continued to get high. That's drugs aren't my problem. They look like they are. They're why I've been to 24 county jails and state prison, federal prison, and had family issues. It's all a result of drugs, but drugs aren't the problem. Like my problem are the things that we're talking about: trauma, right? Fear, depression, anxiety. And without another solution, that's what I do, right? And so I went into college and I just used drugs every day. Oxycontin. That's all I used. All day, every day, for years. I'm going to fast forward a little bit. The normal things happen in college that you would expect somebody who's doing Oxycontin all day and middlemanning or selling drugs to afford their habit. Like I started seeing consequences. I went to jail for the first time for operating a forgery ring at 2021.
Of what? Of money?
Prescriptions.
Prescriptions.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. Then, so I went to jail, got out, and then I was introduced to treatment for the first time. And the way that I was introduced to treatment was through the court. And they basically said, you got 49 counts of forgery. They're all felonies. We'll run them all concurrent. And then we'll suspend this sentence. And all you got to do is complete treatment. And you're not a felon. And you don't go to prison. And you're good to go. So I do. I go to treatment.
How old are you?
21, maybe 22. And it's in Prestonsburg, Kentucky, because Morehead State University is where I went to college. And I'm at this rehab, and it was horrible. And I get there, and I make it through. There was no detox. I mean, I'm sure it existed somewhere, but I didn't know about it. So I went there, and I kicked cold turkey. And I'm like 5 days in it, and I sit down with the case manager for the first time. And she says, you've got 30 days in this rehab, and then you got to do a 6-month halfway house. And I remember thinking, like, wait a minute, my sentence is only a year, and in Kentucky, 6 months kills a year. So I got to stay in rehab longer than I would stay in jail. And I went back to my little room that I shared with 4 guys, and I got all my Jordans and my Abercrombie shirts, and I started trading them with people, and I gave this guy these Jordans for $10 and this guy this shirt. And I hit the road, and in the middle of nowhere, bought Oxycontin and Xanax within 10 minutes and went on the run. And that kind of kicked it off again. I ended up, my bright idea, as I'm on the run, because this charge was in Kentucky, I was like, you know what? They're never going to find me because I'm going to go 10 miles away into the next state. Like that would solve everything. So I go to a different college, literally right across the border of Kentucky, Marshall University. Craziness ensues. And then I end up getting picked up and extradited back to Kentucky and taken to serve out my time. And this is such a crazy time with Oxycontin everywhere, and still no one had a solution. I promise you this is the truth. This is going to sound crazy. I get to this jail to do my time, and if you have a prescription of Oxycontin, they give it to you in the jail at pill call. So I was so happy in this jail.
Did you have any conditions to kind of justify? Did you have like a back injury at all?
No, psychosomatic, because I'd been in some ATV wrecks and some car wrecks. So it was real easy for me to, if you'd asked me then, I'd say, I can't live without them. My back, my L4, my L5. I didn't even know where my L4, L5 was. But no, maybe I needed like Ultram at one point in life. Never did I need Oxycontin. So I'm in this jail and everyone has Oxycontin, and I do 6 months, 21 days, got high every day. And it was at that point, I kind of realized it was probably an issue, because I remember sitting in my cell one night and thinking, like, if I had like an infinite supply of drugs, an infinite supply of Oxycontin, you could put me in a solitary confinement cell forever and I would be like super stoked. Like I would be happy. And then I remember thinking, like, that's probably not a healthy thought, but it never dawned on me that I should stop getting high. I just didn't think it was possible. I didn't know anyone who had stopped, So I get out and same kind of stuff. And I went to treatment again. Then I decided I was going to change people, places, and things. So I came to South Florida and I moved down here, and I was working for a brokerage firm, and I was living in a sober living house in the beginning in Delray Beach. And I remember, and this is like, delusions of grandeur. I was working for this brokerage firm, and they dealt with, they dealt with investments. And I remember I was, I'm a kid from Southern Ohio, right? And these guys are coming to work, and they're driving Lamborghinis, and they're driving Ferraris. And I was watching them do their job, and I was listening to them talk to clients and talk on the phone. And I remember very clearly thinking, like, I can do this better than these people. Whatever they're doing, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do it better, because really my reasoning, I read a paper by the father of modern surgery as we know it. And he was a morphine addict. You guys can read this paper if you want. And he essentially says in this paper, there's no such thing as an opiate problem. If you have enough opiates or the financial, wherewithal to have an unlimited supply of opiates, you can live a perfectly normal life. And this is written by a guy who was doing that. He invented surgery, right? He's a surgeon. He's a scholar. He's not a drug addict like I'm a drug addict. And I didn't know that then. But clearly this guy's doing a little morphine and he's like doing surgery. Meanwhile, like, if I enact that allergy and do a little morphine, I'm like, fist fighting somebody for the last push out of a crack pipe like 2 days later. This guy isn't like that, right? But I read that paper and I said, I just need unlimited money. That's all I need. That's my solution. Not like, let me stop getting high. Just going to get enough money to buy all the drugs.
It's the running out. That's the problem.
That's the problem. That's the problem. Lack of drugs was my dilemma. So I thought. So I did, I picked everything up well. I'm a, like you, like all of us for the most part, I should keep it on me. I'm very manipulative by nature because I lived in addiction for so long. I like that. I was talking about being manipulative at 4 or 5 years old. So I excel in professions that utilize, the ability to sell somebody on anything. So I did well and I made money quickly and I moved up quickly. I'll tell you right now, the worst thing for me was having a lot of money, living in South Florida with a drug addiction, because now it got crazy, and now I've moved to IV drug use at this time. I am now.
How old are you?
Probably 25, 26.
Now, are we talking about like a lot of money and talking about making like what? 200 grand a year, 500 grand a year?
So it started out, when I first started succeeding, and this was a lot of money to me. I was making, 2-3 grand a week, almost immediately. To me, that was insane.
Of course.
Right? I don't have a college degree. I've, thought I was going to have to sell cars for a living. And that very, very quickly, to the point where some weeks I'd make $100,000, $150,000 in a week.
Wow.
And I guess I was always taught, like you, that's how you keep score in life, right? When you get these things, when you have, when you're making 6 figures a week and when you have these awesome cars and you have this house and, that's when you're going to be happy. That's how you keep score. That's how your parents are proud of you, right? And I think that's like a byproduct of the American dream that we read in books and we see in TV. And like when I was at like the pinnacle of like financial success for me at the time, here, let me paint a picture for you. I had a Rolls-Royce Phantom amongst a lot of other cars, but I had this Rolls-Royce Phantom and the top of it was covered in blood because I would sit in the car before I would go into the office. I'd be up 3-4 days on a cocaine and opiate bender. I don't have to get detailed. You guys know how it is. And I'm squirting blood on the ceiling and I'm crying because I'm shooting drugs against my will. And that chapter of my life started where I did not want to fucking get high, bro. I didn't want to. I didn't want to hurt my family. I didn't want to continue to overdose once a month, right? But I didn't have a choice.
You shooting heroin at this point or shooting the pills?
So this was during the heyday of Florida where it was blues and Dilaudid everywhere. And I always, and this is probably why I'm alive to this day, I always preferred IVing prescription medication because I knew the dose. Now, I did a lot of heroin in my day too, and if there was no other option, that's what I was doing. But I did mostly Dilaudid, Roxy 30s, a lot of cocaine. And at this point, I'm doing it against my will, and I don't want to do it, but I can't stop. There's funny stories that float around to me about I drove my Lamborghini through my house.
Wow.
It was just like complete chaos down here for years. And this is where I got introduced to like AA and NA in the community. And I never would put time together, but I would come around. Right. And that seed was planted. And I started to get friends who are sober to this day. A lot of them own treatment centers. They're advocates. They do this stuff. But I started to get around people for the first time who I knew for a fact got high like I got high. And I now knew for a fact that they didn't get high anymore. Because when I first came around, especially NA meetings, I didn't believe it, man. You guys are full of shit. You could, there's no way you don't get high, whatever. If you want to tell a good story to try to get the chick, I'll humor you, but I don't believe that you're not getting high. These guys and girls got sober, and that's cool, but like they were happy. And I started to get like jealous of that. And that's like what motivates me. And it's like I didn't care anymore about like I didn't care about the watch or the next car because like I was empty. I was spiritually bankrupt. I wanted to kill myself every day. I'm going to fast forward, and I'm not even going to mention his name, but there's, one of those guys down here in South Florida, man, I love the guy to death, and I love him to this day. And he had, really tried to steer me in the right direction. And, when I'd get too crazy at my firm would call him up. He'd come in and he'd put me in treatment, and I'd stay in treatment for 2 weeks, and then I'd leave, and then I'd start getting high again. But he was always like, he always really tried. One of the last times I got high in South Florida, I had the house in Boca, the one that I drove the car through, and we were having this party, and it was...
You drove through the garage, or you drove through the house?
No, I drove it through the house. At one point, there was a big 4-car garage in this house, and the previous owner converted it to like a big man cave, kind of sunroom, so they built up like a 2-foot wall, and then there was a big bay window. My girlfriend at the time was there. I was at, I'd just left the office. I'd been doing cocaine all day. We were at Hooters. We were having cocktails. Then I came home, and, she kept blowing me up, get home, get home, get home. So I finally leave, and I'm 4 hours late, and I just got this place. She was decorating when this happened. And I right when I get in my car, I realized like I am on way too much cocaine to go home and act normal. So I had a lot of really great doctors down here at the time who would prescribe me medicine to stay sober, Subutex, Adderall, and Klonopin. And so I took like 20 Klonopins when I leave Fort Lauderdale, and I'm going to Boca. And by the time I get to my cul-de-sac, they really started mixing in with the alcohol. And as I'm pulling up, I fall asleep. And the next thing I know, I wake up, and I had ramped over that wall, and I could see the big screen was a foot away from me, and I'm looking out the window at the big screen, and I'm in the living room, and she's freaking out. And then I back over the rubble, and I take the car down, and I park it 200 yards from the house, and I come back up, and I call the police on myself. And I'm like, hey, somebody stole my car. I don't know, but I think they drove it to my house. I just got home from work.
Wow.
Yeah.
They believed you?
No. Luckily, once again, and this is like, I'm always bailed out of these things. My firm called the attorney. The attorney got there. The attorney talked to the cops. Technically, they couldn't prove I was on the road, and, it's my property. So I got out of it. One of the last times I got high, you know what? The detailed story doesn't matter. I overdosed in front of a lot of people who don't do drugs like I do drugs. And they took me to the ER. I was in a coma for about 3 days, and I woke up, and this AA guy, was the person in my room. And I came to, and I thanked him for being there. I started fumbling around because I had drugs on me that I was going to put in my, I had a direct IV. I was about to get high in the hospital, which I did do. Mm-hmm. And he said, hey, I just want to let you know, I love you, but the reason I'm here is because they were going to pull the plug on you, and someone had to be here. And it hit me, It really hit me that I wasn't going to live through this life. And he left, and I got high in the hospital still. And I got high for weeks, maybe a couple months after that. And then I finally got to the point where I just wanted to die so bad that I called him. And I was like, I don't know, what to do. I had already been to all the high-end treatment centers. I'd been to the crappy, I'd been to everywhere. And I was like, I just don't know what to do. And he was like, just take some direction. And I went to, I don't even remember what it was called. I went to some crappy detox. They didn't even medicate me. And I stayed there for 8 days. And I got out, and I started going to meetings, and I got a sponsor. And I believed AA was a cult still, but I was desperate enough to just say, whatever, I'll fucking join a cult then.
I was the same way. Was like, if it's a cult, fuck it.
Yeah.
I'll drink the Kool-Aid, whatever, stand on my head, whatever you need me to do.
Yeah. And I started working steps. Shit started getting better, man. It got better pretty quick. I stopped doing what I was doing for a living, and I moved. I decided I'm just going to get out of here for a while. I'm starting to get my head back on my shoulders. I moved back to Ohio, and I started working in treatment. And when I started working in treatment, I worked at a Medicaid treatment center. And I worked with, a couple friends of mine who were attorneys, and they were, plugged in with the courts, and we were getting people released to treatment instead of sent to prison, and worked at really made me feel good about myself for the first time. Because I'd never done that, right? I never had a job when I was young. The only jobs I had ever had was ripping people off. That's what I was doing. And I needed that. I needed to wake up every day and be able to build something. Whether that's, I'm not a construction guy. I'm not going to be able to build a house, right? But I think that would be just as rewarding to me. I had to find a way that I could build something instead of tear something down every day. And that's what recovery, working in treatment, that's the feeling that brought me. And it was like I was happy for the first time ever. And then I'm going to fast forward because now it gets a little crazy. I'm 2.5 years sober. And I'm going to an AA meeting. There's 300 people outside. We're in Portsmouth, Ohio. I'm pretty well known in AA there because I've at this point I'm taking service commitments and I'm, speaking, giving leads, and I'm involved. And I pull up to this AA meeting and I get out. I'm a sponsor at this point who has a sponsor, who has sponsees, some of which are there. And I get out and an F-150 pulls up and a guy says, "Jake?" I said, "Yeah." And they emptied out of this Ford truck and they said, "Federal agents, you're under arrest." In front of the whole meeting. I have no idea. I hadn't broke a law in years. 3 years coming up on. And they took me to the local jail and they told me I was being arrested for investment fraud from South Florida.
You still had money at this point?
Not really. Some, not really. So they took me to the county jail where I'm from, where I know everybody, and they couldn't hold me there. So they take me to Butler County Jail, which is the Fed holding. And the indictment was from the Southern District of Florida. And essentially the judge said, do not give him bond. He still has money, according to her. And he has been out of the country. He has the access to funds. He's going to run. Don't bond him out. We want to extradite him to the Southern District of Florida. We will then decide if he's going to be out on an ankle monitor or a bond or whatever. And so I sit in there for 2 days, and they still have to give you a bond hearing. And I go to this bond hearing. Dude, I'm so ashamed. I'm sober, bro, and I'm in federal holding, and I hadn't really called anybody other than my mom, and I don't want anyone to know. And I go out to this bond hearing, and there are so many people that drove an hour and a half to Cincinnati to be there for me and speak for me at this bond hearing. I didn't ask them to. These are AA people. These are people that are just standing up and saying, hey, in 2011, he may have been a real piece of shit. We're not saying he wasn't, but this is what he does now. Mm-hmm. Over and over, everyone's saying that. And they gave me bond. They let me bond out. They put an ankle monitor on me. And the judge basically said, I had no intention of letting you out here today, but whatever you're doing in your life, I think you're turning it around. So I'm going to let you bond out. Don't make me regret it. And so I spent the next, little over a year on an ankle monitor, flying myself back and forth to Miami to go to court. I got sentenced to prison. I knew I was going to.
What'd they give you?
26 months. There was, big newspaper articles down here. It was $18 million. And
Did a whole bunch of people get arrested too?
Mm-hmm. Yep. There was 5 of us. 5 of us get arrested. 5 of us go to prison. And I'll tell you, it's crazy. It chokes me up. The coolest thing about AA and sobriety, to me, and it dawned on me during this time, was look, the fact that I stopped shooting dope and I stopped drinking, that's pretty cool, right? But I'm not convinced that I probably could have done that without AA when things got really bad enough. I'd have been miserable, but I probably could have done it because I see people now do it. There's other solutions. But I was able to face this and look at it for what it was. No fear. Of course, I had the normal fears, I'm going to federal prison. I could get stabbed. I'm not, there's no delusions here. I know I'm not the toughest guy going to this federal prison, right? So those are there, but I had no fear about getting sentenced to prison. I knew it was an opportunity to pay an amends that I owed to the federal government, to the country. And I was excited to have the chance to do it. Mm-hmm. And it was it dawned on me that AA did this for me, right? I didn't do this for me. My friends didn't do this for me. This is a God thing. This is an AA thing. Because normal me, I'm full of fear. I'm full of worry. I'd have got high over that.
That's not an abstinence thing.
No, because if I was abstinent, I would have got high. Because they sentenced me and then let me go home. And then you get a certified letter from federal BOP. They tell you what prison you're going to, and then you get to self-surrender. Abstinent me would have 100% got high.
Yeah.
And ran. Once I got high, then I would have ran. But I go to federal prison, and I try to be careful when I say this. It was a cool experience. It was an interesting, from a guy who, listen, all my heroes are drug
And someone
addicts.
who's been sober for 3 years.
Yeah, dude. I grew up, my heroes were drug addicts. The musicians I listened to, the authors, the poets that I read. I was big into Beat Generation writers, Kerouac, Burroughs, Hunter S. Thompson. I love a good story, right? And so there was some good stories in federal prison. I'm in there with, Ralph DeLeo, the capo of the Colombo crime families, my cellmate. It was an interesting time, but cooler than that was I got to bring a message of recovery and sobriety into federal prison. And I didn't go to a camp. And a lot of my friends that got in trouble did. I have a pretty long rap sheet. I went to a medium high. I went to a real deal. Most of the people in there are doing life sentences. I didn't go in there preachy or AA evangelical, but it just I had this aura that God and AA gave me where these people were just kind of what do you mean I don't need to smoke K2 and do sub strips all day? You know what I mean? What do you mean I can have a peace to me without that? And, I vibed with some of these guys, man. And I don't know if I helped them or not, but they helped me. They helped me because I got to live the life that got me sober even in there. And I get out and I got right back into what I was doing, working in treatment, et cetera. And now I'm going to fast forward to a really important part, the relapse. And I feel like this is a really important part because this was it's hard to deal with a relapse after, I got 5 years sober at this point. And I'd gotten really busy in life and I was not spending a lot of time sponsoring guys, not spending a lot of time doing an inventory at night, doing all the things that I knew I needed to stay sober. And I can, once I'm sober for a little while, I can quit doing all that and be fine, right? Until the shit hits the fan, right? And the shit hit the fan. And somebody who was raised with me that I consider my sister overdosed on heroin and died. And then I had to go speak at her funeral. And then I didn't process it. I didn't run it by anybody. I just, kept it trucking. Then I had kidney stones. And it was such a large kidney stone that there was no way around it. Had to take pain medicine. And I had a tooth thing before this where I took pain medicine and it was fine because I had accountability. I let my mom know, my sponsor know, hey, I got these, Vicodin 5s. I'm going to give them to you. Give me one every 4 hours for 2 days. No issue. There are times where you need pain medicine and there are ways to do it.
Yeah, and you do it not thinking you have a big ego. You're look, this is important.
Yeah.
I want to stay clean through this. I'm going to give my pills to somebody. I'm going to let people know. I'm going to let the doctor know I'm in recovery. And you do it and you have people there with you. And when people relapse on pain meds, it's when they just have the surgery or whatever and they don't really tell anybody and they think it's not a big deal. And then they get home and there's no more pills in the bottle.
And it's great that you say that because that was me. And that was me coming up on 5 years sober, who was well, who am I going to run this by? I'm Mr. Sober. I'm a spiritual, I got this. You know what I mean? I got too big of an ego. I'm not going to, ask somebody. I'm good.
A dentist doesn't go to the dentist.
And then one pill, right? And then they're as prescribed for a day. And then I thought, well, I was in college for 7 years before I dropped out. So I'm basically a doctor, right? So I'm in extra pain today. I'm a smart guy. I can double my dose because I've doubled the pain. And then, so you double the dose. And then within 2 days, I went out and I bought 50 grams of heroin.
Wow.
And at once.
How much?
I don't even remember, bro. I don't even remember. It was Portsmouth, Ohio. Really bad heroin. The same guy that I was telling the story about earlier that was by my hospital bed, I sent him a photo of it when I bought it. I knew where I was going, right? Because I knew that I have a physical allergy, and I know that once you take one, it's over. And I knew that right when I doubled that dose up, it was curtains. I knew it. So I bought it. I sent it to him. I said, hey, going to be in detox soon. And I started getting high. Dude, after all that time, I went back to where I was 5 years earlier in 3 days. Dope sick without it. I clearly still had some, but I'd wake up in the morning dope sick. Hygiene went out the window that quick. Felt like I was never sober. And then I stayed out. I stayed out for a couple months. Not because I enjoyed getting high, because let me tell you, it was fucking miserable. I didn't even have fun at all, right? The whole, head full of AA, belly full of booze thing was going on. Heroin sucks these days anyways. And I was miserable, and I'd let everybody down, and my parents and everybody. But I was so ashamed. I didn't want to come back in the rooms, and I was just going to get high till I died. And the only thing that saved my life was I went to jail because I was on federal probation. It's considered supervision. You have to do a supervision amount when you get out. And, I was failing drug tests, and I got picked up for DUI and whatever, had a needle. And thank God they put me in jail because I was going to get high till I died. That was my plan. And this is only 3 years ago, Sat in that jail cell, man, kicking heroin again, in the middle of nowhere. And I was miserable for about 3 days. And then I was like, this is what I need. And then I just knew like this was like a divine intervention. It's the kind of person I am. Like you got to physically take me away from it because I'm not going to stop. Mm-hmm. Was in jail for, I don't even remember, 30 days, 45 days. And I got out, and probation, the supervision, they could have sent me back to federal prison. I had to come down here to go to court again. And thankfully I have a federal judge. I don't know what the protocol is. I'd love to say her name, but I won't. But I have a federal judge that's been around the system for so long that all through all of this, she saw my problems for what they were, right? She knew I wasn't a bad person or a criminal. She knew I was a really bad drug addict. And once again, she knew this is a relapse. I'm not going to put him back in prison for 20 months again. And she said, I'm going to give you one chance. And if you fail a drug test, anything, you're going back to prison. And I ran with it. And I got back involved, probably like I never have. And the last thing I'll say about like the relapse, and it's kind of crazy, is like when it happened, I thought that was the worst thing that could happen to me. I was embarrassed. It was like my life was over. I was probably going to federal prison. There was nothing positive I could see coming out of that situation. I thought my world was over. And in a very short amount of time, getting back into step work, getting back around the right people, I looked back at it and saw it for what it was. And it was like literally the best thing that could have happened to me. And it's crazy the way that AA and, you hear the literature, a new pair of glasses, but it gives you that new perspective. And like now, even coming up on 3 years later, the whole thing was the best thing that could have happened to me. The relapse too, because like I learned not just from doing the step work and learning about myself, and I learned from these mistakes and what I did wrong and what I didn't do and what did that feel like, right? And so like, listen, I'm a big believer. Like I work in treatment now, and I write about treatment and I speak about treatment, and I'm a big fucking believer that drug addicts are my people because they are the most brilliant, intelligent, creative, empathetic, compassionate people that I've ever met. And having the ability to be around drug addicts all day, every day, dude, it's such a blessing.
Feels like home.
It's such a blessing, bro. And none of this would have happened had the relapse not happened. Mm-hmm. I would have ended, who knows what I would have done, for a living or whatever.
Yeah, a lot of people ask me, like, do you fear relapse? But, in the literature that I read, it says that, our greatest enemy is complacency. So, like, I fear complacency.
Yeah.
I don't fear, like, I'm going to wake up and relapse, because it's not going to happen like that. Complacency happens first. It's complacency and apathy, like those two things where I just start feeling apathetic about being clean. I'm no longer enthusiastic. And enthusiasm is contagious. Once you get around some people that are really into recovery and they're helping you move forward, like you can't help but also move forward. And then once you get away from those people, it starts to slip and it starts to slip and it starts to slip. And then you stop doing the things you need to do. And then sometimes people use when things happen really good to them. Sometimes it's not a death. Sometimes it's a raise at work. Sometimes it's meeting the girl of your dreams, and now you're spending all this time with this girl, and you don't really need to go to meetings. You don't need to call your sponsor. And that complacency happens, and sometimes it takes 3 months, sometimes it takes 3 years. But eventually, in my opinion, in my experience, I've seen people go back to using, whether it starts with a beer or whether it starts with prescription drugs or something.
Yeah.
I want to read an article that someone sent me. And I thought it was so funny when I first saw it. I was like, oh my God, no way. And then when I saw that it was your name, I couldn't believe it. It was so funny. Man arrested for public nudity appeared to be driving an imaginary race car. So when I first saw this, I was like, wow, that's hilarious. And then I kept reading it, and I was like, holy shit. So it says, police responded Tuesday night to reports of a fully nude man yelling, pacing in circles, swinging his underwear around, and making engine noises in the hallway of his apartment complex. Witness told police the man appeared to be driving an imaginary car. Officers heard yelling and found Jake naked in a stairwell of Midtown Loft's apartment in South College Ave. Though he was holding a towel, according to police, it was not covering his genitals. Jake told police he was showering when his friends took his shorts, part of an ongoing prank, and he was in the hallway trying to find them. He confirmed to police he does own more than one pair of shorts. One witness told police he or she heard yelling for at least 45 minutes before they called 911. At least 2 residents reported the incidents. Officers reported his pupils were restricted and he was sweating profusely at the time of his arrest. Police say he admitted to drinking but denied any illegal drugs. Is that when you got arrested? That's the last arrest?
That's the last arrest, but that's how I get high. You know what I mean? Listen, I don't.
You love cars,
bro,
obviously.
I do. I'm a big car guy. Big car guy. Bro, I get high to, I get high to die. You know what I mean? That's like, I get so high that I'm on another planet. And that's just what happens. And then I overdose. And then, and it's, yeah. So you would have never convinced me that something like that happening, I would relatively soon after, 3 years later, be able to look back and be glad it happened and laugh about it. Yeah, man. And a lot of, a few of these guys are guys that really well. You're even one of them. But I was very fortunate when I came back that I have a lot of people around me that are legitimately sober, right? And they would never judge me for getting high or for an article like that, right? That they would welcome me back with open arms and be like, all right, that's a pretty funny, believe me, I got made fun of for it, but it's like, this is how we're going to get you back on track, right? And I had one of my best friends now, he's been my best friend for about 3 years. Bro, basically just kind of in retrospect, he didn't tell me he was doing it, but he kind of put his arm around me and said this is the path you're going to go for a while. Bro, because I had 6 months clean and a couple of it was in jail, and I had no idea and I was bored and I didn't know what I was going to do with life. And he just said, hey man, you're going to do this thing with me for a while. Bro, and without people like this around me, and I've always been fortunate to have these kinds of people, dozens, hundreds of them. But now I know how to to utilize it. And so that kind of brings us up to where I'm at today. Like I said, I work in treatment. I do a lot of advocacy in Ohio. I live in Columbus, Ohio, work with a lot of harm reduction organizations. I do a lot of writing about addiction. I've been fortunate enough to team up with Dan Levin from the New York Times several times about the opioid epidemic in Ohio. And I help a friend of mine run a gigantic blog about addiction where he writes about his personal struggles with it. And we got to start another very big blog. And it's just been so cool, man, because really none of it's work. I get to vibe with guys like you. I get to vibe with other people in addiction and, clean from addiction. And it's so cool.
So you're living back in Ohio now, right?
Yeah.
I know Ohio, I think they say, people are always like, oh man, the drug problem in this state is so bad. I'm like, in every state, in every single state, there's a rampant epidemic of drugs going on. And people don't realize that it's from the opioid crisis that has happened and has still going on. And now you have millions of people addicted to opiates. Now they can't get specific opiates. So I remember seeing articles of oh my God, they got rid of Oxycontin. It's like, okay, bro, they're still getting Roxys and they're still doing Dilaudids. And, how did you feel about the Purdue article that just came out that everyone's been circling that they have to repay back $3 billion or something?
Yeah, and the actual, and maybe we can post a link, but the New York Times ran the article and then they reached out to me and did another article where I got to kind of comment on it. And I'm not bringing this up because woohoo, it's the New York Times. I'm bringing it up because they really edited my opinion on that because to me it's disrespectful.
I
right?
agree.
It's
when people sent it to me, I was like, that's nothing. That's not a win for us. To me, yeah, it's crazy.
The Sackler family they're going to end up having to give up $2-3 billion tops they're worth 20, right? It's not going to hurt them financially. This is a family that is responsible for 100,000 plus deaths a year for decades. And no one's going to go to jail.
And those are just the deaths. Imagine all the overdoses, the families that have been tear apart. And I'm not here to say, like, I don't feel like a victim because I don't think my drug use was like a victim thing where I was headed down that path anyways. If I was in Montana, I'd be doing meth. I was just a drug addict. I would have found something. I did find readily available prescription drugs that are similar to heroin, where I have friends that would shoot heroin and shoot pills and be like, oh, the pills are better than the heroin. Like, that's how close we're talking in proximity of being like heroin. I don't feel like a victim because it's not like I hurt my back at 30 years old and never did a drug before and got addicted to pills, but a lot of people are. There are hundreds of thousands of stories of people, young kids that never had a drug problem and in high school got prescribed Perk 30s and we're not talking about, oh, they gave me 15 Roxys. We're talking about they gave me 110 on my first visit, you know?
Yeah.
And then who's going to say no to selling them once you realize the street value of them and the doctor shopping and all that shit. So when people send me that article, I just scoff like, it's not like I don't feel satisfaction from that at all. I would prefer that there's more treatment available for addicts. Like I would prefer that if an addict wanted to go to detox, he can.
Yeah.
If someone needs detox right now, I would really like it if they could just pick up a phone and go. And it's not that easy. If you don't have health insurance or money, good luck. It's very hard to find a county-run facility. Florida has some of the best county-run facilities. In Florida, we're super grateful to have BARC and IRT and all these other places that if you don't have money, there's a waiting list. But if you're persistent, like they'll let you in. Most states don't have shit like that. It's a 2 or 3 day maybe in a state-run hospital, and then you're out the door, and then figure it out on your own.
And in that's so crazy to me too, because like this is Sackler family and Purdue Pharma and the opioid epidemic, and the new president-elect has a son who struggled with it. This has been in the public eye for years now. Right. And I know because every publication in Ohio, the Columbus Dispatch, they all, it's kind of transparent. They want a story every month, about the opioid epidemic because they know that it's like everyone's affected by it. So we've known this for so long. Why don't we have that? Why is it so hard, to get treatment in certain states without, if you do have Medicaid, if you don't have insurance, if you don't have these things, and that circles back to the Sackler family. Like, why are we not taking all $20 billion and building treatment centers, in every county? Mm-hmm. That's what frustrates me when I read articles about that.
How's the opiate epidemic in Ohio right now?
It's bad, man. It's really bad. Fentanyl made it a lot worse. And it's crazy because like we were the pill mill capital of the world for a while before they really caught on in Florida. And at the time, even I would have said so had I been sober, that like them cracking down on the pill mills, everyone thought was going to be a good thing. It was the worst thing that could have happened because the pill mills were closed down and then the drug cartels moved in and then it became black tar heroin. And then fentanyl came in, right? People started realizing they could, increase their profit margins. And now it's devastating. And meth and ice is really bad in Ohio. And that's, man, because
people make it.
I can, just based on mutual connection from being an addict, I can usually get through to a heroin addict, right? To get some help. It's tough to get through to somebody on ice, man. And it makes it really, really hard.
Even in treatment. Treatment, you have someone on meth and the insurance company doesn't want to cert them for detox or res. Yep. They're saying that they don't meet criteria to be in a lockdown type of detox or something. Yeah. And then it takes them a week, 2 weeks to even know where the fuck they're at. You got someone coming off hardcore meth use. Dude, they got rabbit in their blood, bro. They're not staying anywhere for longer than 4 or 5 days. Talking to themselves, hearing voices, all sorts of shit.
Yeah. And Columbus, Ohio is like, it's very They're very good about keeping certain areas of Columbus. It looks very presentable and it's very upscale, and the downtown is clean and it's nice. But when you go into certain areas of Columbus, it's a war zone, right? And the rural areas of Southern Ohio are even worse. So, the 3 states right there, I think West Virginia is number 1 in overdose deaths. Ohio is number 2, and Kentucky's like number 4. And these are states that border each other, right? And that's not a coincidence, and I won't harp on it anymore, but it is not a coincidence that exact area leads the nation by far in opioid deaths, and it's the exact area that Purdue Pharma targeted, period.
Well, I appreciate you coming out, man. I love you very much. It's always good to see you.
Love you too, bro.
Anything else you want to say?
No. You know what? No, I'm good. I'm good, man.
You sure?
Yeah.
What were you going to say?
I don't remember now.
All right. Well, I appreciate you so much, bro. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Yep.
This show is not affiliated with any specific 12-step program. If you or a loved one is struggling with an addiction, please find a local 12-step meeting. If you believe you may need detox or drug treatment of any kind, please call 888-699-9395 to speak to a specialist. The show is sponsored by United Recovery Project, a state-of-the-art drug and alcohol rehab facility. You can visit our website at unitedrecoveryproject.com.